Who did this to you? Said the Mafia Boss. By dawn, every man in the city feared for his life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started with the story. It was a rainy Thursday night in the city. The sound of raindrops hitting the sidewalk was a constant reminder of how everything felt out of place for Ella. Her heart was pounding, her breath shallow as she stumbled through the alley, trying to get away from the life she could no longer endure. The cold rain mixed with the warmth of her tears as she looked down at her bruised wrists. The marks from Tyler's grip were still there, a constant reminder of how he'd shoved her into the wall just hours before. He had always been this way. Angry, unpredictable, a man who once promised to love her but now seemed hell-bent on breaking her. Every time she tried to leave, he would promise to change. Every time she believed him. But tonight was different. Tonight, the rage in his eyes had been too much, too close. She knew she couldn't stay another minute. She had to leave. As she stumbled down the alley, she felt something. No, someone, watching her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she turned a corner and saw the figure standing there. Tall, powerful, and unshakable, he was dressed in a black suit that looked far too expensive for this part of town. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and there was a quiet intensity in his eyes that made her heart race. He was not just anyone. He was a man who carried himself with an authority that made everything around him feel smaller. He didn't move at first, just watched her as if he was trying to decide what to do. Ella stopped dead in her tracks, her pulse quickening. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low but steady. She didn't know why, but something about him felt different from the men she had known. There was no anger in his voice, no judgment, just a calmness that made her feel, for the first time in what seemed like forever, safe. She nodded, though she could barely speak. She wasn't okay. She was far from it. But the way he looked at her made her want to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning her face, and then, without saying another word, he reached out and touched her wrist. The pain from the bruises flared, but his touch was gentle, careful, as if he understood what she had been through. Ella couldn't help but flinch. She had never been treated like this. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice colder now, sharper. Ella opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She was too terrified to speak, too afraid of what Tyler might do if he found out she had told someone. But the man in front of her didn't look like someone who would let things slide. His eyes hardened as he took a step back and looked around the alley, as if he was scanning the area for a threat. Then, without warning, he turned his gaze back to her. "By dawn," he said, his voice dark with intent, "every man in this city will fear for his life if they hurt you." Ella's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know who this man was, but she knew one thing for sure. He wasn't here to let anyone get away with what they had done to her. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel so alone. After that chilling promise, Ella stood in the alleyway, her mind racing, her heart pounding against her ribs. The rain continued to fall, but now, it felt different, more like a cleansing. The man in the black suit, whose presence seemed to fill the space around them, didn't say anything more. He simply watched her, as though he was waiting for something. She didn't know what to do, what to say. She had no plan, no escape. But one thing was certain, she was no longer running alone. "Come with me," he finally said, his voice soft but commanding. "I'll make sure you're safe." Safe. The word seemed foreign to her, almost impossible to believe. But the way he looked at her, the way he spoke, made her wonder if this could be the beginning of something different, something she never thought she'd have, a chance at a life free from fear. He didn't ask for any more details, didn't question her about Tyler or what had happened earlier. He simply turned and walked away, expecting her to follow. And, without thinking, Ella did. She didn't even question why she was doing it. Perhaps it was the exhaustion, the emotional numbness that had taken over her after months of living in fear. Or perhaps, deep down, she was craving for someone to take control for once. She needed it more than she could admit. They walked in silence through the dark streets of the city, the sound of their footsteps the only noise that broke the quiet. The man didn't look back to check if she was still behind him, but Ella couldn't help but glance at him every few seconds. His stride was confident, purposeful, and it was clear that he was used to getting what he wanted. They turned a corner, and Ella found herself facing an imposing black car. The kind that looked like it belonged to someone with power, someone who didn't answer to anyone. The man opened the door for her, and she hesitated only for a moment before climbing inside. As soon as she settled into the plush leather seat, the door slammed shut behind her, and the car began to move. She had no idea where they were going, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going back. She wasn't going back to Tyler, to the life that had broken her. The car pulled onto a quieter street, and before long, they stopped in front of a grand building. An old mansion, massive and intimidating, with iron gates and high walls. Ella's breath caught in her throat. It looked like a fortress, and it felt like one. This man, whoever he was not just any rich man. He was someone who operated in a world she didn't understand. The man stepped out of the car first, then turned to open her door. "Welcome to your new home," he said, his voice even, though there was an edge to it that suggested this was not an invitation, but an order. Ella looked up at the mansion, then back at him. "What do you want from me?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. The man's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time since they'd met, he seemed almost human. "I want you safe," he said, his tone surprisingly gentle. "I want you to live without fear, and I want to make sure that the people who hurt you never get the chance to do it again." His words hung in the air, and for the first time in years, Ella felt a flicker of hope. Could it really be possible? Could she have a life free from the terror that had followed her for so long? But as they walked up the steps to the door, her fear came rushing back. What kind of man was this? What was his world? And more importantly, why was he doing this for her? She had no answers. The door opened, and they stepped into a grand foyer. The marble floors gleamed, and the chandelier above cast a soft glow over everything. Ella felt small, like she didn't belong in this world. But she didn't have the strength to walk away. Not now. She followed him down a long hallway, the air growing colder with every step. Finally, they reached a door, and the man turned to face her. "You'll stay here for now," he said, his eyes searching hers. "You can rest. You can heal." He didn't wait for her to respond before turning and walking away, leaving her standing in the doorway of a room that looked as though it belonged to someone else, a stranger's life. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was about to be a part of something that could protect her, something that could give her a future. As the door clicked shut behind her, Ella sank down onto the bed, her body exhausted, her mind racing. This was not the life she'd imagined, but it was the life she had now. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she was no longer running. She was ready to face whatever came next. Ella lay in the unfamiliar bed, her body exhausted, her mind still struggling to understand the events of the last few hours. The room was dark except for the soft glow of the city, lights filtering through the thick curtains. She had never seen a place like this before, luxury beyond anything she had ever imagined. The sheets felt like silk against her skin, the pillows fluffy and perfect. Everything in this room screamed power, wealth, and control. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that for the first time in years, she wasn't scared. She wasn't running. She was safe. But even as the thought crossed her mind, doubt crept in. What kind of man was this? Why had he taken her in without hesitation, without question? He could have left her on the street, let her continue living in fear, but he hadn't. She didn't understand it, and that frightened her more than anything. Ella turned onto her side, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The man, the one who had promised her safety, had been so sure of himself, so confident. His words still echoed in her mind. "By dawn, every man in the city will fear for his life if they hurt you." But who was he? What did he mean? She had seen his power, the way people stepped aside when he entered a room, the way everyone obeyed him without question. He was a man who commanded respect, who had no hesitation when it came to protecting what was his. But what about her? Was she just another one of his possessions? Another thing to protect, like his cars or his buildings? Ella didn't know, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. His dark eyes, the calm in his voice, the way he had touched her wrist so gently when he first saw the bruises. No one had ever treated her like that before. Everyone else, everyone she had ever known, had seen her as weak, someone to be controlled, someone to be put in her place. But this man, this mafia boss, didn't see her like that. He saw her as someone worth protecting, someone worth saving. The thought should have made her feel good, but it only made her more confused. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to kindness. Ella tried to sleep, but every time her eyes closed, the image of his face flashed in her mind. The way he had spoken to her with such intensity, such authority. She couldn't deny it. He was powerful, and he could do anything he wanted. The sound of footsteps outside her door broke her from her thoughts. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. But then the door opened, and there he was. The man she had been thinking about. The man who had made that promise to her. He stepped into the room, his presence filling the space, and for a moment, Ella felt like she couldn't breathe. "I hope you're comfortable," he said, his voice smooth but carrying an undertone of concern. "I know this is a lot to take in, but you're safe here. No one will hurt you again." Ella didn't know how to respond. She just stared at him, still processing everything. He had to be a criminal, right? A man who controlled everything in the shadows. A man whose power was born from fear. But why was he helping her? Why did he care? He walked over to the bed, sitting down next to her. His eyes never left hers, and for a moment, Ella thought he might say something more, but he just sat there, quietly. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" He seemed to think about that for a moment before answering. "Because no one deserves to live in fear. Not you. Not anyone." His words surprised her. There was no arrogance in his tone, no hint of manipulation. Just honesty. "And what if I don't want your help?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Then I'll let you go," he said simply. "But I'll always be here if you need me." Ella didn't know what to say. She couldn't explain why, but for the first time, she believed him. She believed he would let her go if she wanted to. But she didn't want to leave. She didn't want to go back to the life she had. She didn't want to face Tyler again, to feel that constant fear and anxiety that had ruled her life for so long. She looked at the man sitting beside her, the man who had made her feel something she hadn't felt in so long, safe. "I don't know what to do," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I don't know how to live without fear." He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to do anything. Just take it one day at a time. And when you're ready, we'll figure out the rest." Ella nodded, her eyes starting to tear up. She had never been good at asking for help, never been good at trusting anyone. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. Maybe she could find a way out of this life. Maybe she could finally be free. As the tears fell, she felt his hand on her shoulder, grounding her, keeping her steady. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly. And for the first time, Ella believed it. The next few days passed in a blur for Ella. The weight of the decision to trust him, the mafia boss, still hung heavily on her shoulders, but she no longer felt the panic that had ruled her life for so long. Every day, she found herself adjusting to this new world, one that was foreign to her but, at the same time, strangely comforting. She woke up each morning in the same luxurious room, the sunlight filtering through the curtains, and for the first time, she felt like she could breathe without fear. But something still gnawed at her. Why did he care so much? Why had he intervened when there was no reason for him to? She wasn't the first woman to be abused, and she certainly wouldn't be the last. But the way he had looked at her, the way he had made her feel, it wasn't like anything she had ever experienced. She had expected him to be cold, distant, but instead, he was attentive, always checking in on her, making sure she had everything she needed. It was unnerving at first. The man had power, wealth, and an undeniable presence. But there was something else about him, something vulnerable. As the days went on, Ella started seeing glimpses of that vulnerability. He wasn't just the mafia boss who controlled the city's underworld. He was a man who had seen too much, a man who understood pain in ways that no one else did. One evening, she found herself sitting with him in his office, a room filled with expensive furniture, leather-bound books, and the faint smell of cigars. The silence between them was comfortable, but still, Ella felt the need to ask the questions that had been weighing on her mind. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked, her voice steady but her heart racing. He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he stared out the window, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because I can," he said simply, his voice low and steady. "Because no one else will." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Ella didn't know how to respond. She had expected something more complex, some grand explanation, but instead, he had given her the simplest answer. "But why me?" she asked again, her voice a little softer this time. "Why did you choose me?" "I didn't choose you," he said, his tone almost wistful. "But I can't stand to see anyone suffer, especially when it's something I can change. You don't deserve to be afraid. You don't deserve to live the way you were." Ella felt a knot form in her chest. The way he spoke made her feel like she was worth something, like she wasn't just another victim. He made her feel human again, not just someone to be rescued, but someone worthy of being protected. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I don't know how to live without fear. It's all I've known for so long." He moved from behind his desk and walked over to her, his presence filling the room. His hand rested gently on her shoulder, a gesture that was both comforting and commanding. "One day at a time," he said softly. "You'll learn to trust again. And when you're ready, we'll move forward. But only when you're ready." Ella nodded, trying to steady the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She had never had anyone speak to her like this, never had anyone offer her such a simple solution to a lifetime of fear. But there was still a part of her that couldn't let go. She still had doubts, still had fears. As the days turned into weeks, she found herself slowly opening up to him, though it wasn't easy. She had spent so long keeping people at arm's length, never letting anyone get close enough to hurt her again. But he was different. He didn't try to push her, didn't try to force her to talk. He simply gave her space. And that was what she needed. She began spending more time with him, learning more about the man behind the Mafia Boss persona. She found out he had a past, a dark past, filled with loss and betrayal. But there was also kindness there, a kindness that Ella had never expected to find in someone like him. Slowly, she started to understand that he wasn't just a protector. He was someone who had suffered too, someone who understood her pain because he had felt it himself. One evening, as they sat together in his office, he finally shared the story of his own life. "I wasn't always this way," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I wasn't always the man people fear. But the world took everything from me, and I had no choice but to become this." Ella listened, her heart aching for him. She had never known how deep his wounds went, how much he had lost to the life he now lived. And in that moment, she realized that he wasn't just protecting her from Tyler. He was protecting her from the world, from everything that had tried to break her. "I understand," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I understand more than you know." They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their shared understanding settling between them. Ella no longer felt alone in her pain. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe freely, like she could heal. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future. A future where fear didn't rule her life. A future where she could be free. The days that followed were strange, like a dream that Ella couldn't quite wake up from. She had been living in the mansion now for over a week, but it still felt surreal. The luxury, the space, the security, none of it felt real. She spent her days wandering the vast halls, her mind constantly on edge, unsure of what to do with herself. Her thoughts would always circle back to the same question. Why had he taken her in? Why was the Mafia Boss, someone who controlled so much, so determined to keep her safe? One evening, after a quiet dinner that they had shared in the grand dining room, the man, whose name she still didn't know, invited her to the study. The room was dimly lit by soft golden lamps, with darkwood furniture lining the walls and shelves of books that reached the ceiling. It was a world of wealth and power, one she had never imagined she would be part of. The man stood by the window, looking out over the city that sprawled below them. His back was to her, and for a moment, Ella just watched him. There was something both intimidating and magnetic about him. His tall frame, the confidence with which he moved, the sense of command that surrounded him. It was all so foreign to her, yet so captivating. "I know you have questions," he said, breaking the silence without turning around. "I don't know what you want from me," Ella replied, her voice hesitant, unsure. "I just don't understand why you're doing this. You don't know me." He turned then, his eyes locking onto hers, and for a moment, Ella felt as though he could see straight through her. He was so calm, so in control, that it was almost unnerving. "I know enough," he said softly. "I know what it's like to live in fear, to lose everything. I know what it's like to be betrayed, to feel like the world is against you. I've been there." Ella swallowed hard. His words struck a chord deep inside her, something she hadn't expected. "I'm not the same person I was before," he continued, his voice unwavering. "And I'm not asking you to be the same either. I'm offering you a chance to start over, to leave the past behind." Ella stared at him, her heart racing. This wasn't a man who made empty promises. She could tell that much. He had seen pain, had lived through things she couldn't even imagine. But it wasn't the pain that stood out in his eyes. It was the resolve, the strength, and a quiet understanding that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, he was someone she could trust. "But I don't know how," she whispered. "I don't know how to let go of all of it. How to stop being afraid." He stepped toward her then, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but the presence he exuded was almost overwhelming. "You don't have to know," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You just have to decide that you're ready. When you're ready, I'll be here." Ella looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of doubt, but found none. There was no manipulation, no agenda, just a man who was offering her something she had never had before, control over her own life. The thought of it was both terrifying and freeing. For the first time in so long, Ella felt like she had a choice. She could choose to stay, to leave, to start over, or to keep running. The weight of that decision hung heavily on her shoulders, but it also felt like the first real decision she had ever made for herself. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He gave a small nod, his eyes never leaving hers. "That's okay," he said. "You will be. When the time comes." Ella could feel her heart thudding in her chest. She wasn't sure if she believed him, but something about the way he spoke, the certainty in his voice, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, he was right. The next few days were filled with awkward silences and unspoken questions. Ella spent her time exploring the mansion, getting used to the strange silence that came with it. There were no loud noises, no fighting, no yelling. It was almost too quiet, too perfect. She found herself spending hours in the garden, walking the paths that wound through the tall trees and manicured hedges. It was peaceful, but she couldn't escape the feeling that something was about to change. She didn't know what it was, but she could feel it in the air. It wasn't until a few days later that she got her answer. She was sitting in the drawing room, reading a book when the man appeared at the door. He didn't knock, didn't ask to come in. He simply walked in and stopped when he saw her. "It's time," he said, his voice steady. Ella didn't understand what he meant. "Time for what?" she asked, her heart racing. "It's time for you to stop hiding," he said softly. "Time for you to take control of your own life." Ella's breath caught in her throat. She had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, hoping it would never come. But now that it was here, she felt a strange sense of relief. She wasn't ready, but maybe she never would be. Maybe there would never be a perfect time to make the choice. She just had to do it. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. He smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him. "You can," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "You've already started." Ella had been living in the mansion for almost a month now, and although the luxury was undeniable, the stillness of it all started to feel unsettling. The walls were tall, and the windows seemed to close her in, even as they opened up to a vast world outside. She still had so many questions, and yet, she hadn't yet asked the ones that were most important. Why was the Mafia Boss so determined to keep her here? What was he expecting in return? But more than that, Ella was beginning to wonder about herself. What had she become in this new world? She no longer recognized the woman who had been so desperate to escape her old life. She wasn't even sure if she could return to the person she used to be. She sat on the edge of the bed one evening, her fingers brushing over the delicate fabric of the sheets. She hadn't spoken to him all day. The man who had saved her, the man who had offered her freedom, was no longer a mystery, but he was still an enigma. She understood his need for control, the way he moved through life with purpose and power. She also understood that he saw in her someone worth protecting, someone worth fighting for. But what did that mean for her? What was she supposed to do now? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The door opened, and he stepped inside. His presence filled the room, just as it always did. "We need to talk," he said, his voice smooth and commanding. Ella nodded, but her heart was racing. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "About you," he said simply, stepping closer. "It's time for you to make a decision." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. A decision. What decision? She hadn't realized it, but in all the time she had spent here, in all the time she had spent with him, she hadn't been making any decisions for herself. She had been living in a kind of limbo, protected but trapped in a world that didn't feel like hers. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely audible now. He tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through her. "I don't want anything from you," he said, his voice steady. "I'm offering you a choice. A way forward." "A choice?" Ella repeated, her voice shaking. "I don't know what to choose." He nodded, a flicker of understanding in his gaze. "That's the first step," he said quietly. "You need to choose for yourself. You need to decide what kind of life you want to have. Whether you want to stay here, with me, or if you want to leave and face the world on your own." The weight of his words settled heavily on her chest. Could she leave this life? Could she go back to the world she had tried so desperately to escape? The life that had been filled with fear, violence, and despair? The choice seemed impossible, but it wasn't just about what she wanted. It was about who she had become since she had stepped into this world. Had she truly changed? Had she learned to trust again? He could see her struggling, and he stepped closer, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You don't have to decide right away," he said softly. "But you will have to decide eventually. And when you do, I'll be here. I'll be waiting." Ella closed her eyes for a moment, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She didn't know what she wanted, but she knew one thing. She couldn't keep living like this, stuck in a place between two worlds. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of her mind. But for the first time, she felt like she had some control over her life. For the first time, she could see a future that didn't revolve around fear. She could see a future where she could be free. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his presence calm but unwavering. "You're not alone," he said finally. "Not anymore." His words cut through the fog in her mind. She wasn't alone. She hadn't been alone since the moment he had stepped into her life. And for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that she could find her way out of the darkness. She didn't have all the answers, but maybe that was okay. Maybe she didn't need to have it all figured out right now. Maybe she just needed to take the first step. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I know," he said, his voice filled with understanding. "But you don't have to be. Not anymore." She looked up at him, meeting his gaze, and for the first time, she saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't just the power, the control. It was something deeper. Something that told her he would help her. Something that told her he cared. She took a deep breath, her mind made up. "Okay," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll stay. For now." He nodded, his expression softening. "Good. We'll take it one day at a time." And for the first time, Ella felt like she was ready to face whatever came next. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't afraid of the future. She was ready to live it. And with him by her side, maybe, just maybe, she could finally start to heal. Ella had made her choice. She wasn't going back to the life she had known, the fear that had once consumed her every day. She had chosen to stay, to try to rebuild, and to face the unknown with the man who had given her a chance to escape it all. As the days passed, she began to feel the weight of that decision. The mansion had become her new reality, and while it was luxurious, it felt cold and unfamiliar. She was still adjusting to this new life, still figuring out how to live without the constant anxiety that had been a part of her existence for so long. The Mafia Boss, as she still called him, had kept his word. He never pressured her to do anything she wasn't ready for. He let her take things at her own pace, allowing her the space she needed to find herself again. But she could feel the shift within herself. There were moments when she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering when the next attack would come. There were moments when she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could be happy again. She spent her days in the mansion's library, reading or simply looking out the window at the sprawling gardens below. The silence was comforting at first, but now it felt oppressive. She missed the noise of the world, the hum of life outside these walls. One afternoon, As she was walking through the grand hallway, she saw him standing at the end, watching her. The man who had saved her, the man who had made her feel safe when she had been so lost. He was standing there, his dark eyes watching her with an intensity she couldn't quite understand. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with concern. Ella stopped in her tracks. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. How could she explain the way her emotions were constantly in flux? How she was torn between gratitude for what he had given her and fear of what might come next. "I'm just trying to figure things out," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to live like this." "Like what?" he asked, stepping closer, his expression softening. "Like, free," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know what it's like to not be afraid. I don't know what it's like to not look over my shoulder." His eyes softened as he walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said quietly. "I've made sure of that. No one will hurt you while you're here. I won't let them." His words should have brought her comfort, but instead, they stirred something deep inside her. It was one thing to be protected, but another to truly feel safe. She realized then that the safety he offered wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. But she wasn't sure if she was ready to let go of the fear that had been so much a part of her for so long. "I don't know how to trust," she admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "I don't know how to believe that I'm safe, that no one will hurt me again." He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, his gaze steady and unyielding. Then, without warning, he reached out and gently touched her arm. "I'm asking you to trust me," he said softly. "Not because you have to, but because I've made a promise. And I will keep that promise." Ella looked up at him, searching his eyes for any hint of doubt, but all she saw was determination. He was unwavering in his resolve. He meant it. And for the first time, Ella felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. Maybe she could trust herself again. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I really am." He nodded, his expression softening. "I know you are. And that's enough." They stood there for a long moment, the air between them thick with unspoken words. Ella felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, hope, uncertainty, but there was also something else. Something that made her believe that she could find a way forward. He was offering her more than just safety. He was offering her a chance to rebuild, to start over. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all she needed. As the days went by, Ella found herself becoming more and more comfortable in her new life. She spent time with him, learning more about the world he lived in. She discovered that the Mafia Boss was not just a man of power. He was a man who had been through his own struggles. He had lost family, had fought battles of his own, and had seen the worst of humanity. But through it all, he had never lost sight of the one thing that mattered, protecting those he cared about. Ella began to understand him in a way she hadn't before. He wasn't just a man who lived by a code of power and fear. He was someone who had fought for his own survival, just like she had. And he understood what it meant to be lost and broken, to feel like there was no way out. But together, they were beginning to build something new. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to find out. With each passing day, she felt herself letting go of the fear that had held her captive for so long. And for the first time in years, she felt like she had a chance at a real future. A future where she wasn't running, where she wasn't hiding. A future where she was free. Ella had spent the last few weeks adjusting to a life she never thought possible. The mansion that had once seemed like a prison now felt more like a home, though she still hadn't fully let go of the fear that had ruled her for so long. She spent her days in a haze, trying to find some sense of normalcy. But the question she had been avoiding for weeks continued to haunt her. What was the Mafia Boss expecting in return for all of this? Why had he saved her? Why was he offering her this chance at a new life? She had decided to trust him, but she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was more to his kindness than met the eye. She had grown used to the way he protected her, the way he kept people from crossing her path. But it wasn't just about protection, it was about control. He had a way of getting into her thoughts, into her life, without ever seeming to push too hard. He respected her space, yet he was always there, a steady presence in her life. It wasn't until one evening, when the sun was setting over the mansion's sprawling grounds, that Ella's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. She had been sitting by the window, gazing out at the horizon, when she heard it. It was a soft knock, yet there was no mistaking who it was. She stood up, her heart beating faster in her chest. For the first time in a while, she felt a sense of nervous anticipation. When she opened the door, he was standing there, his posture commanding, but his expression softer than usual. "I need to speak with you," he said, his voice low, but with an edge of urgency. "Come with me." Without questioning, Ella followed him through the hallways of the mansion. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was as though they both understood that the moment they were heading toward would change things between them. As they reached his private study, he gestured for her to sit, and he closed the door behind them. The room was dimly lit, with a single desk lamp, casting shadows across the dark wood of the bookshelves. Ella sat in the chair he indicated, her heart pounding in her chest. He sat down behind the desk, facing her, and leaned back in his chair. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice more serious than usual. "About everything. About you. About us." Ella's breath caught in her throat. She had wondered when this conversation would happen, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready for it. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure if you understand what I'm offering you," he began, his eyes never leaving hers. "This is more than just a roof over your head, more than just keeping you safe from what's out there. I'm offering you a new life. A life where you don't have to live in fear. A life where you're free to make your own choices, to be your own person." Ella's chest tightened as she listened to his words. She had heard them before, heard them in the quiet moments when he'd told her she was safe, that no one would ever hurt her again. But this felt different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about living. And for the first time, Ella realized that she had the power to make her own choices. But there was one thing she still didn't understand. Why him? Why was he doing this for her? "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Because I can't stand to see people like you suffer. Because I know what it's like to have nothing, to be nothing. And I've built this life, this empire, so that I can protect those who need it. So that I can give them the chance to live without fear. I'm offering that to you. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because you deserve it." Ella sat there, stunned by the rawness of his words. She had never known anyone like him, someone who had seen so much darkness, but still chose to give. He wasn't offering her just protection. He was offering her the chance to reclaim her life, to take control of her own destiny. "And what do you want in return?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. He smiled then. A small, almost imperceptible smile. "I don't want anything from you. I'm not asking for anything in return. This is your chance, your choice. You can stay here, with me, or you can leave. The decision is yours." Ella felt a knot in her stomach. It was the moment of truth, the choice she had been avoiding for so long. She had been living in the shadows, unsure of what to do with herself. But now, in front of him, in this room, she had to decide what kind of life she wanted. For the first time, she realized that she had the power to choose. She could leave, walk away from all of this, and try to make it on her own. But deep down, she knew that she didn't want to leave. She didn't want to face the world alone. Not anymore. "I choose to stay," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. The words felt like a declaration, like a promise to herself. She was ready to live, to step out of the darkness and into a future she had never imagined. He stood up from the desk, and for the first time, he reached out to her, his hand gentle on her arm. "Good," he said, "because I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." Ella nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She had made her decision, and it felt like the first step toward a new beginning. A future where she wasn't afraid. A future where she was free. Ella had made her choice, and it was a choice she could not take back. The decision to stay in the mansion, to embrace the safety and the strange new life that had been offered to her, still felt surreal. The world outside her window felt so distant now, as though she had stepped into a different reality, a reality where fear no longer ruled her every step. Yet, even as the days passed, she couldn't help but feel an unsettling sense of confusion. She had chosen to stay, but what did that really mean? For the first time, Ella was free from the constant threat that had haunted her. She had a chance to start over, but it wasn't as simple as that. There were shadows lurking in the back of her mind, the shadows of the life she had left behind, of the man who had hurt her, and of the Mafia boss who had made it all possible. She often found herself wondering if she truly understood the man who had offered her everything. Why did he do it? Why had he stepped into her life and swept her away from everything she had known? The more time she spent with him, the more complicated the questions became. He was not a man who showed vulnerability easily, but there were moments when Ella could sense a softness in him, a tenderness that contradicted the power he wielded over the world. He had given her protection, stability, but what did he expect in return? As the days turned into weeks, she began to feel more comfortable in his presence. The mansion, once an intimidating fortress, started to feel like a home. But there was still so much she didn't understand about the man who had made this all possible. He was always there, watching over her in the way that only he could, but there were still walls around him, walls that kept her from fully reaching him. One evening, as the sun set and the golden glow filled the mansion, Ella found herself walking the grounds again. The garden was peaceful, but her mind was far from calm. Her thoughts swirled with the same questions she had been asking herself for weeks. "What do you want from me?" she whispered aloud to herself, as if the words would somehow reveal the truth. She had seen how people feared him, how his presence alone commanded respect. She had seen the way others stepped aside when he entered a room. But she had never seen him lose control. He was a man of iron resolve, but there were cracks in the facade, cracks that she was beginning to see. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her from her thoughts. She turned to find him standing there, his dark eyes locked on hers. "You've been distant," he said, his voice low. Ella didn't know how to respond. The truth was, she had been distant from herself, from him, from everything she had thought she knew. "I've been thinking," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thinking about what?" he asked, taking a step closer, his expression unreadable. Ella hesitated. This was the moment. She had to know. "About us," she said, her heart racing. "About why you're doing this. Why you're helping me." His eyes softened slightly, and he took another step closer. "You don't need to worry about that," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of something more. "I'm doing this because I made a promise. I'm doing this because you're worth it." Ella looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "But what about you?" she asked. "What do you want from me?" He took a deep breath and looked away for a moment, as though weighing his words carefully. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more personal. "I want nothing from you," he said, his tone soft but firm. "But I want you to understand that what I've given you is a choice. A chance. I want you to see that you don't have to live in fear anymore. That you have the power to decide what your life will be." His words hit her like a wave. She had spent so long trapped in her past, in a life defined by fear, that she hadn't realized she had the power to change her future. She had the power to choose. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, the uncertainty still clouding her mind. "I don't know how to let go of everything that's happened." He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have to let go all at once," he said gently. "But you need to start. You need to decide what you want." Ella's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at him, feeling a strange mix of fear and hope. For the first time in her life, she felt like the power was in her hands. It wasn't about him, about his promises or his protection. It was about her. She had to choose. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to face everything." He reached out and touched her arm, his grip firm yet reassuring. "You are strong," he said. "You've always been strong. But you don't have to face it alone. Not anymore." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time in a long time, Ella felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was a small spark, but it was enough. She wasn't alone, and she wasn't trapped anymore. She was free to choose. "I'll try," she whispered. And for the first time, she believed that she could. She could take control of her life. She could live without fear. With him by her side, maybe she could finally heal. Ella stood at the edge of the balcony, the cold breeze of the evening air brushing against her skin. Below her, the city sprawled endlessly, a world of lights and noise. But up here, in this mansion, it felt like she was in a different world altogether. A world she had never imagined she would be part of. The decision she had made weeks ago to stay, to trust him, was still echoing in her mind. The Mafia Boss, her protector, the man who had saved her life and offered her a future she hadn't dared to dream of. She had begun to feel more at home in this world, but as the days passed, something inside her grew uneasy. Was she really ready for this life? Was she ready to embrace it fully, to walk beside him and not be haunted by the past? The past that still clung to her, the memories of the fear, the violence, the control. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to push the doubts away. She could feel his presence behind her before she even heard the sound of his footsteps. "You're thinking too much," he said, his voice low but clear. Ella turned, finding him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable but somehow gentle. "I have to think," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "This is all new to me. It's hard not to question it." He stepped closer, the familiar scent of his cologne surrounding her. His gaze was steady as he looked at her, and for a moment, she could see the depth of understanding in his eyes. He wasn't just a man of power. He was someone who had seen what it was like to struggle, to be lost. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice soft, but with a certainty that made her feel safe. "I've been where you are. I've fought my own battles. And I know that nothing worth having comes easy." Ella looked up at him, her heart pounding. "But I'm scared," she admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I don't know if I'm ready to let go of everything." He reached out then, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to let go all at once. You just need to trust that you're ready. You're stronger than you think." His words were exactly what she needed to hear, but it didn't make the choice any easier. She had been running for so long, hiding from the life she had once known, and now that she had a chance at something better, something real, she didn't know how to grasp it fully. "What if I can't do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, a small but reassuring curve of his lips. "You already are. You've made it this far, haven't you?" Ella nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She had made it this far, and maybe that was enough. Maybe she didn't need to have everything figured out. Maybe, for the first time, she could take things one step at a time. The next morning, everything felt different. The air seemed fresher, the light softer. Ella found herself moving through the mansion with a sense of purpose that had been missing before. She knew she had a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. And that path, she realized, was one she would walk with him. They didn't talk much in the days that followed, but they didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with an unspoken understanding. He continued to protect her, to offer her everything he had. But there was no pressure, no expectation. It was as though they had both accepted that this was the beginning of something new. Ella started to venture out more, exploring the city that she had once been so afraid of. She walked through the streets with a sense of freedom she had never known. The city, with all its noise and chaos, didn't feel threatening anymore. She felt like she was beginning to carve out a place for herself in it. And with every step, she felt a little more like herself. But even as she began to embrace this new life, she knew she couldn't completely escape the past. One evening, as she sat in the library, the man entered, his footsteps echoing through the room. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice calm. Ella looked up at him, her heart tightening. "I'm still adjusting," she replied, her voice soft. "I don't know if I'll ever fully adjust. The past still feels too close." He walked over to her, his expression serious now. "The past doesn't define you," he said quietly. "It's what you do now that matters. And I believe in you." Ella felt a lump form in her throat at his words. He had always been so certain, so unwavering in his belief that she could be more than her past. "Thank you," she whispered, though she didn't know if she truly believed it yet. He nodded, as if he understood the weight of her doubts. "You don't have to thank me. Just know that I'm here. And I always will be." The silence that followed felt different than the others. This time, it wasn't filled with uncertainty. It was filled with promise. Ella wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt like she had a place in it. A place by his side. And that, she realized, was enough. She didn't need to know everything. She didn't need to have all the answers. All she needed to do was trust that this was the beginning of something new. Something real. And for the first time, Ella felt like she could finally start living again. The weeks that followed were a blur of normalcy, a stark contrast to the life Ella had known before. She was no longer hiding in the shadows, no longer tiptoeing around the life that had kept her bound in fear. She was learning to breathe again, to trust again. And for the first time in years, she was beginning to feel like herself. The Mafia Boss, as she had come to think of him, was everything she had imagined, and nothing like she had imagined. He was powerful, confident, a man who demanded respect in every room he entered. But there was more to him than just his authority. Behind the sharp eyes and commanding presence, Ella had begun to see glimpses of the man who had been shaped by loss and hardship, just like her. He had given her a second chance, a chance to rebuild, and for that, she was grateful. But there was still a part of her that couldn't quite shake the feeling that she owed him something. The promise he had made, that she would never be alone, never be afraid again, had been more than just words. He had shown her that he meant it with every action. Every day, he watched over her, guided her, made sure that no one could touch her. But with each passing day, she felt the weight of her own growing dependence on him. What would she do if he wasn't there? Would she be strong enough to stand on her own? One evening, as she sat in the grand living room of the mansion, the man entered the room, his presence as commanding as ever. His gaze found hers immediately, and for a moment, Ella couldn't breathe. There was a new intensity in his eyes, a look that told her something was about to change. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but edged with something she couldn't place. She nodded, her heart beating faster. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "About you," he said, stepping closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "About what comes next." Ella stood up, suddenly feeling a sense of unease. She had been waiting for this moment, for the conversation that would make everything clear. But now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're ready to move forward," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I've given you everything, protection, safety. But you need to start making choices. You need to start deciding what you want." His words hit her hard. She had always lived in the shadows of fear, letting others make decisions for her. And now, he was telling her to take control of her own life, to step out of the safety he had created for her and choose her own path. "What if I don't know what I want?" she asked, her voice trembling. He reached out then, his hand gently touching her arm. "Then I'll help you figure it out," he said softly. "But you can't keep living in this place of uncertainty. You need to make a choice." Ella swallowed hard. She had never been good at making decisions, especially ones that affected her future. But the man in front of her wasn't just any man. He wasn't just offering her protection. He was offering her a chance to live, to choose, to take control of her life. The weight of it all crashed down on her. Could she really do it? Could she step into the future with the confidence he had in her? She had already taken one step by staying. But now, he was asking her to take the next one. To trust herself. To trust him. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of determination rise inside her. "I want to be free," she said, her voice stronger than before. "I want to live without fear. Without hiding." He smiled then, a small but genuine smile. "Then it's time," he said. "It's time for you to step out of the shadows and into the light. You are free, Ella, and no one can take that away from you." His words filled her with a sense of purpose, a sense of power that she hadn't felt in years. She was ready, ready to face whatever came next, ready to take control of her own future. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly free. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, there would be obstacles. But she had a choice. And for the first time, that choice was hers to make. As the man turned to leave, he paused and looked back at her. "You're not alone in this," he said softly. "I'm here, every step of the way." Ella nodded, her heart full. She wasn't alone anymore. And with him by her side, she knew that anything was possible. She wasn't just living to survive anymore. She was living to thrive. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to take on whatever came next. Ella stood at the window, gazing out over the city that sprawled beneath her, a city she had once feared but was beginning to see with new eyes. The past few weeks had been filled with moments of quiet reflection and strange peace. Life in the mansion had become a delicate balance of learning to trust, to breathe, and to face the choices that lay ahead. She had made the decision to stay, to build a new life, but now, with every passing day, the questions she had buried in her mind were coming to the surface once again. What did the Mafia boss really want from her? Was this truly a second chance, or was she simply a pawn in a world she didn't fully understand? As she stood there, caught between the promise of a new life and the weight of her past, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He was always near, always watching over her. She had gotten used to his presence in her life, but now, more than ever, she felt like the walls between them were beginning to close in. He had given her everything: safety, security, protection. But had he given her freedom? Or was she still trapped in a life dictated by someone else? "You've been quiet." His voice came from behind her, calm and steady, but tinged with a hint of concern. Ella turned to face him, her heart racing as she searched his face for answers. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about everything." His gaze never wavered, his eyes studying hers with the intensity she had come to know so well. "What about everything?" he asked, stepping closer. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Ella admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure I know what I'm supposed to do." The Mafia boss didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, watching her with those calculating eyes. For a moment, Ella thought he might walk away, leave her to figure things out on her own. But instead, he reached out and touched her arm, his touch grounding her in the moment. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said, his voice softer now. "You just need to take the next step. And I'll be here every step of the way." Ella swallowed, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had never had anyone offer her that kind of reassurance, that kind of certainty. The life she had left behind had been filled with lies, with fear, with betrayal. But here, with him, she was being given a chance to start over, to take control of her own future. "What if I'm not strong enough?" she asked, her voice shaking with doubt. "What if I can't live up to what you're offering?" He smiled, a small, reassuring smile that seemed to carry with it the weight of his own experiences, his own battles. "You are strong enough," he said firmly. "You've survived everything that life has thrown at you so far, and you will keep surviving. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going." Ella nodded slowly, taking in his words. He was right. She had made it this far. She had survived, and now she had the chance to live. It wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about taking the next step and trusting that the rest would follow. The weight of her past was still there, hanging over her like a shadow, but for the first time, she felt like she could let go of it. She didn't have to be defined by it anymore. "Okay," she said, her voice steady now. "I'm ready. Let's take the next step." The Mafia boss nodded, his eyes softening as he regarded her. "Good," he said quietly. "We'll do this together." Over the next few days, Ella found herself making more decisions. Small ones at first, but they were important. What she wanted to wear, where she wanted to go, how she wanted to spend her time. The more she made choices for herself, the more empowered she felt. She had spent so long in a world where others controlled her every move that it was hard to break free from that mentality. But with each decision, she began to feel more like herself, more like the woman she was meant to be. The Mafia boss remained by her side, watching over her without hovering, guiding her without taking control. He never pressured her to move faster, to make bigger leaps than she was ready for. He was patient, understanding that rebuilding a life wasn't something that could be done overnight. But as the days went on, Ella began to realize that this life she was building was not just about survival. It was about freedom. The freedom to choose, the freedom to live without fear, the freedom to be herself. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to face it alone. With him by her side, she could face whatever came next. And that, in itself, was enough to make her believe that anything was possible. As the sun set on the city once again, Ella stood at the window, looking out at the horizon. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The future was unknown, but it no longer scared her. She was ready to face it, ready to take control of her life, and ready to step into the new beginning that was waiting for her. The weeks that followed felt like a new beginning, but there was still so much Ella hadn't fully processed. She had taken control of her own life, a life she had never imagined she could have, and yet the shadow of her past still loomed over her. The man who had promised her freedom, the man who had given her a chance to rebuild, had been her steady rock. The Mafia boss, his name still felt foreign to her, but every day, he became more of a presence she relied on. He had taught her that power wasn't just about control or fear, it was about choice. And now, as they stood together in the mansion, everything had come full circle. Ella was no longer the woman who had walked in fear, hiding from the world. She had made her own decisions, taken the first steps into a life she was proud to build. But now, another challenge lay ahead. The future she had embraced was no longer just about her own survival. It was about the people around her, about understanding the role she played in the world he had created. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the city lights flickered to life, he stood in the doorway of her room. She turned from the window, feeling a familiar weight in her chest. It was time. She had known this moment was coming, but she wasn't sure she was ready. "I think you're ready," he said quietly, stepping into the room. "Ready for what?" she asked, her voice soft, but her heart racing in anticipation. "To make a choice," he replied, his dark eyes steady. "The world we're in, the life you've stepped into, it's not without consequences. It's not without danger." Ella nodded slowly, understanding exactly what he meant. She had seen the power he commanded, the influence he held. She had seen the world through his eyes, and she had come to accept that she wasn't a helpless bystander in this life anymore. She was part of it, but she hadn't expected the weight of it to feel so heavy. "And if I'm not ready?" she asked, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. "Then you won't do anything," he said simply. "You don't have to make any decision you're not ready for. But understand this. This life, this power, it's yours to shape if you choose it." Ella felt the weight of his words sink in. She could choose. She could step back, live in the shadows, let him handle everything. Or she could step into the light, take control, and be the force she knew she had the potential to be. For so long, she had lived in fear of making the wrong decision, of trusting the wrong people, of losing control. But with him, she realized, she wasn't losing control. She was gaining it. "I'm ready," she said finally, her voice clear and unwavering. "I want this. I want to build something. I want to be part of this world." The look in his eyes softened, just for a moment. "You'll have to make sacrifices," he warned, his voice quiet but filled with weight. "The price of power is never cheap." She nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. The life he lived, the world they inhabited, was dangerous. But it was also full of opportunity, and the choice was hers to make. "I'm willing to pay whatever price it takes," she said, her voice steady, her eyes meeting his. "Then let's begin," he said, his voice a low murmur. And with that, Ella stepped fully into the world he had offered her. The mansion, the power, the city, everything was within her grasp. But more than that, she understood the responsibility that came with it. She wasn't just the woman in his life anymore. She was part of his world. She was a force in her own right. As the days passed, Ella grew more comfortable in her new role. She made decisions, not just for herself, but for those who depended on her now. She had learned from him, from the way he moved through the world with purpose, and she knew that her strength would come from making those tough decisions, from facing the challenges head-on. But she also knew that she wasn't doing it alone. He was by her side, guiding her, but giving her the space to grow, to become someone who didn't need protection anymore. They worked together, slowly building their own empire, a world where they both could thrive. Ella had made peace with her past, not by forgetting it, but by using it to shape her future. She no longer feared the life she had once run from. She had become the person she was meant to be, and the future, no matter how uncertain, was hers to claim. And as they stood together on the balcony that overlooked the city, she knew that this was just the beginning. They had taken the first steps towards something greater, something that would change everything. The city, the world, was theirs for the taking. And this time, she would not run. She would stand tall beside him, ready for whatever came next. In this gripping dark romance, Ella embarks on a transformative journey where the lines between safety, power, and love blur. Trapped in a past filled with fear, she finds herself rescued by a powerful mafia boss, who promises her protection and a chance at a life free from her torment. As she steps into his world, Ella faces the dilemma of trusting a man who holds both her safety and her heart in his hands. The dark romance between them deepens as secrets unfold, and Ella must choose whether to embrace this new life or return to the shadows. As she grapples with her fears and newfound freedom, Ella learns that the path to healing is not always straightforward, and the price of love and power can be steep. In this dark romance, the stakes are high, and the choices Ella makes will shape her future. With every decision, she moves closer to understanding her true strength, realizing that the man who saved her may be the one who changes her forever. The dark romance between Ella and the mafia boss is one filled with passion, tension, and unexpected twists, leaving readers captivated until the very end.